The weeks sliding from July into August do not arrive like a polite visitor knocking at the door. They burst through, scattering the old furniture of thought and feeling as if the room of life is being rearranged without permission. This is not a season for balance, it is a season for full saturation. Every sensation seems amplified, every unspoken thought closer to the surface, as though the fabric of the everyday has been stretched thin enough for the hidden currents beneath to glow through. What bends here is not only the calendar, but the architecture of the year ahead, tilting in response to the decisions made under this particular sky. If this spoke to your soul, don't just scroll. Subscribe now and join the journey. Your next breakthrough might be one video away. Some can sense the change before its footprints appear in the visible world. It hums under the skin, a low and persistent frequency that has no obvious source, yet leaves a person feeling as if they're standing at the edge of something vast. The shift is both invitation and test, an urging to step into the next vibration rather than be dragged toward it. When awareness comes early, it can feel like a strange kind of solitude, as though holding a secret that hasn't yet been spoken aloud. In such moments, one might wonder, is this foresight a gift, or a weight? And if the truth arrives before its appointed hour, will the world be ready to hear it? There are patterns so subtle they slip past awareness, disguised as harmless rituals, repeated without a second thought. Yet during certain thresholds, they shift from innocent habit to energy leak. In seasons where the unseen currents are in upheaval, small acts can distort the entire field around them. What masquerades as comfort can become the very thing siphoning vitality, blurring perception, and muting the instinct to act. The transition between these months is not a quiet drift but a sharp turn into deeper territory, and anything that dilutes awareness becomes a hidden cost. This is the point in the path where avoidance no longer feels like rest, it feels like erosion. The instinct to mask intensity with artificial calm is strong, especially when the air is thick with tension. It is tempting to dress unease in polite smiles, to frame every fracture as a blessing, to hold the darker shades of the self at arm's length. But this particular turning of the year is not an era of light glosses. It is a descent into the shadow layers where the raw material of transformation waits. Suppressed emotions do not dissolve, they ferment. Left untouched, they press upward with more force, seeking an opening. The current moment does not call for painted serenity, it calls for unfiltered presence. There is no shame in feeling the heaviness when it arrives. Fatigue, irritability, the sensation of being internally overturned, these are not signs of collapse but the body's way of metabolizing what the mind cannot yet name. The structure of the self is shifting under a weight older than the current circumstance. What looks like dismantling may in fact be an ignition, the early sparks of something long kept dormant. In times like these, the mind often mistakes activation for unraveling, not realizing they can feel the same in the beginning. In the midst of these internal tremors, another trap often appears, the belief that stripping the body will clear the spirit. Restriction becomes a badge of purity, fasting a declaration of readiness for higher states. Yet in cycles such as this, the body is not an obstacle, it is the final shield between inner stability and the turbulence of the unseen. Every breath drawn, every nutrient absorbed, is part of the alchemy that keeps the boundary between realms intact. Starving the vessel in pursuit of clarity is like dismantling the walls of a home in the middle of a storm to let the light in. It exposes the core to forces it is not meant to bear directly. Discomfort in itself is not always cleansing, and emptiness is not always alignment. When the senses are already heightened, when rest comes slow and the world feels loud, the body is already under pressure. To deprive it now is to weaken the very mechanism designed to navigate this passage. True support in this season does not come from punishing the form, but from feeding it what strengthens its grounding. Balanced nourishment, mineral-rich foods, and stable routines create a foundation for both presence and perception. This is not a call to excess or avoidance, but to meeting the body's requests without judgment. Often, the impulse to become lighter is not about ascension at all. It is a quiet wish to disappear from the demands of embodiment. Yet the current threshold requires full participation, not withdrawal. The closing of July into August is as much a biological shift as it is a spiritual one. The currents move through muscle and bone as surely as they do through thought and dream. To remain present here is to honor the vessel, not abandon it. Strength is not found in detachment from the physical, but in the capacity to anchor spirit within it. The season ahead will not be met by a half-present self, it will require the whole, alive in both body and essence. And perhaps the real question lingering in the air is this: when the next wave arrives, will the form holding the soul be ready to stand? There is a certain pressure that begins to build when the unknown lingers too long. The mind starts pacing, searching for patterns, reaching for certainty as if the future could be forced into shape by sheer will. In moments like this, every thought becomes a measuring tool, every silence a space to be filled with projections. Yet trying to map the road ahead now is like trying to paint a landscape while standing in the middle of a storm. Details will be distorted, proportions unreliable. The current atmosphere is not an invitation to design the destination, it is a call to let unnecessary weight fall away. This restless urge to define is often mistaken for guidance, when in truth it is anxiety wearing the mask of purpose. The obscurity that surrounds these days is not punishment, it is a deliberate veil, redirecting awareness toward senses that do not rely on vision. Between the closing of July and the opening of August lies a passage where the tangible slows, but the intangible stirs. Here, strategy is premature. The work is not to advance but to loosen the old skin so the new one can take its place. The course ahead is assembling without interference, aligning itself with the rhythms of inner readiness. When that alignment is exact, the change will not need to be chased, it will arrive as if it had been walking alongside all along. In such spaces, long-term blueprints are unnecessary, even tomorrow's certainty optional. What is essential is the cultivation of stillness, the willingness to let the noise dissipate before declaring any direction. How many times have decisions made in fog later demanded undoing? That question alone can be enough to quiet the rush. When confusion sits in the room, it does not always need to be pushed out. Sometimes it is the companion that teaches endurance, the one who stays until clarity has gathered enough weight to stand on its own. To resist turning uncertainty into crisis is to preserve energy for the moment when it will truly be needed. And perhaps that is the quiet lesson of this week. Patience is not inaction, it is precision. There are times when a sudden inner opening occurs, a moment so vivid it feels as if the entire being has caught fire with recognition. It may arrive as a release, a long-awaited answer, or the tangible arrival of something silently called in for months. The instinct to share this light is strong, to spill it into the hands of others before it has even settled into one's own. But here, in the volatile space between seasons, that impulse can strip the power from the very thing that has just been born. Sacred growth requires a period of protection. To display it too soon is to expose tender roots to shifting winds before they can take hold in the soil. In this delicate stage, silence acts as a shelter and stillness as a shield. What is spoken now carries the weight of a spell, yet not all spells fall into fertile ground. Even well-meaning witnesses can disturb the balance, redirecting energy away from where it needs to anchor. Many have felt the subtle collapse that follows the premature sharing of something precious. That loss of intensity is not imagined, it is the diffusion of concentrated energy. In such moments, withholding is not about secrecy or dimming the light. It is about allowing it to expand unobserved until it becomes unshakable. Celebration can still happen, but let it begin inwardly, in quiet conversation with the unseen, in the private record of a page, in the deepened rhythm of breath. The transformation is real, and reality often grows strongest when it is allowed to mature in the dark. When an energetic threshold opens, it does more than heighten perception, it leaves the inner field unlatched. In such times, impressions and intentions from the outside world slip through without resistance, embedding themselves deep. The current passage between one August and the next carries that exact quality, a thinning of the invisible walls. This permeability is both gift and risk, for what enriches the spirit can enter just as easily as what diminishes it. There are always those attuned to such openings, though not for their own healing. Some are drawn not by malice but by an unconscious hunger for vitality they cannot generate on their own. They appear precisely when the inner waters grow still, their presence churning the surface with unresolved storms. The connection may be familiar, a long-standing bond, an old responsibility, even someone once carried through their own trials. Yet in this season, the familiar can be the very source of depletion. Such individuals rarely seek permission, they seek proximity. They feel the same tremors in the unseen, but instead of transmuting the pressure, they cling to any steady light within reach. Left unchecked, these bonds act like weights, pulling energy backward just as it is poised to surge forward. The cost is not merely emotional, it shapes the very frequency carried into the next cycle. Confusion, hesitation, and stagnation are rarely born in isolation. They are often inherited through unchecked connection. Preservation of clarity does not require cruelty, it requires discernment. Interaction with certain patterns of energy leaves the body restless, the mind scattered, the inner current dulled. When such effects repeat, withdrawal becomes an act of hygiene rather than rejection. It is possible to hold compassion without surrendering the space needed for transformation. Every engagement that drains vitality sends a quiet message inward, that someone else's comfort outweighs the sanctity of the emerging self. Over time, this silent compromise reshapes the trajectory of growth. Those aligned with the next stage of life will not demand constant entry into the most vulnerable layers. They will understand the need for distance, or better, they will be engaged in their own refinement. In moments like this, the absence of certain voices is not loss, it is purification. Silence becomes a kind of filter, allowing only what strengthens to remain. The question worth asking is simple. Which connections leave the inner space brighter, and which leave it dimmed? The answer to that question can determine not only the quality of this transition, but the integrity of the seasons that follow. There are moments when the fog that's mistaken for confusion is nothing more than the refusal to accept what is already known. The present passage between one August and the next does not exist to offer more clues or scattered fragments of reassurance. Its task is far sharper. It calls for recognition of the truth that has been standing in plain sight, perhaps for months, perhaps longer, while being quietly avoided. The reluctance is rarely due to absence of guidance, it is born from the discomfort of what that guidance demands. Often, the most direct revelations arrive at the most inconvenient times. Insight appears, but it refuses to align with the carefully constructed image of how life was supposed to unfold. So the mind asks again and again, searching for a softer version of the same truth, hoping repetition will alter its edges. Yet this repeated asking is not seeking, it is stalling. It traps the spirit in a loop, circling the same point without moving through it. At this stage, the thinness of the veil between potential and manifestation shortens the distance between inner recognition and outer form. Hesitation carries greater cost. Each moment spent doubting the validity of an instinct is a moment in which opportunity shifts position. The issue is rarely a lack of knowing. It is the volume of resistance competing with that knowing. Eventually, the steady stream of signs begins to fade. Not from punishment, but from the simple truth that silence can speak louder than any repeated message. When the same insight is ignored long enough, the current withdraws, leaving space for the realization that messages are not infinite, they are invitations, and invitations expire. Has there ever been a time when hesitation allowed a door to quietly close? What this cycle demands is a clean alignment between understanding and movement. That may mean ending a chapter that once felt safe, releasing a possibility that has already revealed itself as illusion, or dismantling the scaffolding of not yet and maybe that has been propping up a decision long overdue. The clarity has already arrived, the courage is what lags behind. In truth, the work now is not to request more confirmation, but to place trust in the knowledge already earned. The step forward may not guarantee comfort, but it will guarantee momentum. And momentum in this season is the bridge between the life that has been tolerated and the life that is waiting. To delay here is to risk missing the crossing entirely. The exit has been prepared for some time, and the road toward it will not remain visible forever. When the pull toward change is this precise, this insistent, the question is no longer, what is the right path? But, will the step be taken before the path fades? There is a particular snare that arises in times of heightened sensitivity, an almost magnetic pull toward carrying the weight of another's struggle. For those attuned to emotional undercurrents, the turmoil of others can feel like an unspoken summons. A loved one is unraveling, an old companion sends out signals of distress, or someone drifts deeper into their repeating cycles, and the instinct is to step into the role of rescuer. Yet this threshold in time does not require rescue, it requires restraint. In this phase, every person is standing before their own reflection, one shaped by the exact lessons their path demands. The currents at play now are not random. They are deliberate returns of unresolved patterns. The grief surfacing in one, the cycles of sabotage in another, these are sacred confrontations between self and source. To intervene without invitation is to interrupt an intricate process of becoming. It may look like compassion, but unasked for solutions often carry the undertone of control. There is also the uncomfortable truth that rushing to solve another's hardship can be a disguised avoidance of one's own. Immersing in someone else's fire offers temporary escape from tending to personal shadows, from addressing the raw spaces within that this same energetic passage has been stirring. It is a noble-sounding distraction, but a distraction all the same. During weeks when the unseen boundary between minds and emotions is thinner, another's chaos does not remain theirs alone. Stepping into the center of another's spiral invites fragments of it into one's own field. These fragments do not dissolve easily. They cling, and they alter the clarity needed to move through the shift cleanly. This is why holding distance is not indifference, it is protection of both parties' integrity. Transformation often requires allowing the heat to do its work without cooling it prematurely. The fire belongs to the one standing in it, and only there can the alchemy unfold. Bearing witness without interference can be the highest act of trust in another's capacity to rise. If aid is requested, it can be offered with care and precision, but without the impulse to mold their path into a reflection of one's own. The role here is not savior but mirror. Presence itself can be the anchor another needs, without the need to touch or shape their process. Sometimes the most profound support is the space that says, "I believe you can meet this," without reaching to pull them out before they have found their own strength. And perhaps that is the deeper lesson of this portal, that not every connection is served by action, and not every ache is an invitation to intervene. Some stories are meant to be walked alone, and the courage to let that happen is its own form of quiet wisdom. In the late hours, when the noise of the day fades and the air seems charged with something unnameable, the body can begin to speak in strange and urgent ways. Heat and chill may trade places without warning, the pulse may quicken despite stillness, and the skin may hum as though a low current runs beneath it. The mind, restless in this atmosphere, often reaches for distraction. For many, that means the glow of a screen, a spiral into endless searches for explanations. Yet this reflex does not soothe, it tightens the coil, feeding the mind's hunger for certainty when what's happening cannot be charted by logic. What unfolds in such nights is not malfunction but adaptation. The nervous system strains, not under threat, but under the weight of increased capacity. The energetic body stretches to accommodate signals that move faster than thought can translate. This liminal space between July and August is less a symptom and more a signal, an indication that deeper layers are awakening. What feels erratic is simply the body learning to hold what it has not held before. It is tempting to label these sensations as problems, to assign them to imbalance, blockage, or decline. Yet the greater risk lies not in the sensation itself, but in the narrative built around it. A restless night becomes a perceived warning, a momentary wave of unease becomes a prophecy of collapse. In truth, the act of naming every discomfort as harm shifts the body into defense, slowing the very integration these moments are meant to accelerate. This passage asks for trust in what is unfolding beneath conscious control. The awkwardness of becoming something new will always carry an element of disorientation. Evolution rarely feels smooth, it feels foreign. Relaxation, not resistance, is what allows the intensity to pass more swiftly. The body, in its quiet brilliance, knows the route. It asks only for space to travel it without the burden of constant interpretation. Alongside these internal recalibrations comes another, more subtle pattern: the impulse to clear one's environment of every irritant. Emotional ties, conversations, even fleeting interactions begin to feel heavier, sharper. A single tense exchange can ignite the urge to sever contact entirely. The temptation is to frame this as empowerment, a righteous cleansing of all that no longer aligns. Yet in the current volatile climate, this can be as much an act of control as of clarity. Not every sting is a toxin to be expelled. Some are mirrors revealing unhealed corners. The rapid dismissal of people or situations during this charged season can short-circuit the lesson they carry. Boundaries are essential, but when they are built in panic, they become armor that keeps both harm and growth at bay. A question worth asking in these moments is the discomfort pointing outward or inward? True discernment thrives in stillness, not in the adrenaline of reaction. When decisions to cut ties are made from a place of agitation, they rarely hold their shape once the intensity passes. Sometimes the greater act of strength is to remain in observation, allowing the emotional wave to crest before choosing a course. In that pause, the difference between self-protection and self-sabotage becomes clearer. Empowerment, when grounded, is steady. It does not rush. It does not demand the immediate erasure of all that challenges the self. If separation is truly needed, the knowing will arrive without the chaos, carrying the weight of inevitability rather than the heat of escape. And if the bond remains, it will be because the lesson within it was met fully, not dodged. In this way, the transition ahead is not just about cleansing the path. It is about learning when to sweep and when to stand still. There are moments when the mind slips away from the present and begins staging entire conversations that never actually occur. A walk down the street, the simple act of washing dishes, or the quiet before sleep can suddenly become a stage for debates with absent figures. In these mental plays, old wounds are reopened, imagined responses are crafted, and endings are rewritten again and again. Though it can feel like working something out, it is often nothing more than circling the same unhealed point without ever leaving it. This season's transition between July and August magnifies thought patterns, stirring up echoes of dynamics thought to be resolved. For minds accustomed to movement, that magnification often turns into an elaborate rehearsal, recreating confrontations with shadows of the past. It is a performance without audience or resolution, designed not to heal but to delay the stillness that would follow. And stillness, in its pure form, can be more confronting than conflict. The danger is subtle. These internal arguments are not harmless daydreams. They consume focus and scatter the clarity that could be used for present choices. They pull emotional weight from history into now, blurring the line between memory and reality. In this charged energetic window, such distractions are not merely mental. They seep outward, leaving a haze around perception, muting the intuitive voice that is most needed. When the mind insists on re-entering a battle already concluded, it is worth asking, what is the benefit of keeping it alive? Sometimes the attachment is less about the other person and more about the identity formed in opposition to them. Releasing the argument can feel like releasing a part of the self. But perhaps that is the very self that is ready to evolve. The call of this passage is toward presence, not defense. The battles worth meeting now are not fought in memory's corridors but in the living moment, where the next chapter is forming. The past has nothing new to offer. The present holds everything still possible. In choosing to return here, the cycle is interrupted, and energy once spent on phantoms becomes fuel for what is actually arriving. And perhaps that is the quiet irony. The peace being postponed by these imaginary wars is not something that needs to be earned. It is already here, waiting to be claimed the moment the stage is cleared. The question is not whether the old arguments can be won, but whether they still deserve a place in the mind at all.